Hey guys, and welcome back to Just Ask Jason. We are here every single week, and by we, I mean me because it's always me, and hopefully you're used to my face by now. This week, I want to talk about my favorite holiday, Thanksgiving, which is coming up in just over a week. I could have waited until next week and released this, but most of you guys are going to be busy with the holidays, so I figured I'd go ahead and do it now. We're going to be talking about Thanksgiving and its history and whether or not it's a Christian holiday, and maybe a few ideas about how Christians should celebrate it and whether or not it's good for us and if we should even celebrate it at all. That's our topic today. Jason's favorite holiday coming up in just over a week, Thanksgiving, and how we should view it as Christians. Before we get started, here's a little bit of history of Thanksgiving. Many of you have been taught in elementary school that Thanksgiving began at Plymouth, the settlement of Plymouth in New England in the United States. And that's kind of, sort of, maybe not actually true, because Virginia also claims to be the location of the first Thanksgiving 2 years before Plymouth. And they have a little bit better historical evidence, actually. So the great state of Virginia, my home state, claims it because there is a quote in a charter between a settlement in eastern Virginia and the London Company, an exploration and settlement company. And the charter reads, in part, "The day of our ship's arrival at the place assigned in the land of Virginia shall be yearly and perpetually kept holy as a day of thanksgiving to the Almighty God." However, the Puritans in New England probably did celebrate something resembling a modern Thanksgiving just 2 years later in 1621, but some historians ignore both of those and say they weren't really Thanksgiving, or they didn't really happen, or some combination thereof, and that the first Thanksgiving was actually in the 1630s. And others say it was actually in the 1660s. But pretty much everyone has agreed on one central theme, that Thanksgiving, when it originated, or Thanksgiving-like celebrations, were religious. They were put out by Christians, usually perpetuated by ministers and by congregations, and then eventually, later on down the line, state representatives, government officials kind of started hopping on the bandwagon and perpetuating Thanksgiving as a secular holiday as well as a religious one. Eventually, Thanksgiving was made official by Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, in an address on 1860, or in the year of 1860. He called it a national day of, and I quote, "thanksgiving and praise to our beneficent Father who dwelleth in the heavens." So even when Abraham Lincoln made his claim or his statement or his appointment of Thanksgiving as a national holiday that would be held on the 4th or sometimes 3rd Thursday of November, even when he made that declaration, Thanksgiving was still a religious thing, still a thing, or a celebration where Christians would come together and would say, "We are so thankful to God for all of these good things that He has given us." But we know that today Thanksgiving is celebrated by plenty of people who aren't religious, much like Christmas is. So is Thanksgiving in and of itself a religious holiday? Well, it was at the beginning. Maybe not so much anymore, but more importantly, does it still have value for Christians today? Well, in order to answer that, we really need to talk about what Thanksgiving is today. Thanksgiving is a kind of vague holiday and largely secular. We say that we gather together to be thankful. But what are we thankful for? Well, a lot of us will go to those standard vague answers, like we're thankful for our food and our houses and our clothes and our families. It's usually a family gathering. There's usually a lot of food. But besides the vague things that we're thankful for, that are we really thankful for them because we don't talk about them the other 364 days of the year? And besides it usually being a family gathering and there usually being a large meal, we don't really know what Thanksgiving is. It's an excuse to get together and eat a lot of carbs. And that's pretty much how the holiday is celebrated. However, there are plenty of controversies to go along with what should be a fairly inane holiday. There's a movement of people that push back, not so much against Thanksgiving as a holiday, but just the way that we treat it in the United States, because we say that Thanksgiving is a holiday where we want to gather the family together and be thankful and love one another and do that sort of thing. But with the onward march of Christmas-fueled sales every single year, we have plenty of retail workers that are forced to work Thanksgiving night, meaning they don't get to celebrate Thanksgiving with their families. And that's, well, kind of cruel, isn't it? To say that we have a holiday that's all about the family and thankfulness and then forcing people to work that night. That's kind of rough, isn't it? Maybe a little bit mean on our part. The more important or more widespread objection to Thanksgiving is on the basis of the relationship between the U.S. and Native American groups historically, which has been, well, bloody. Now, some Native groups do have a positive view of Thanksgiving, having combined it with their own tradition, notably Great Plains tribes, which are more properly known as the Indigenous peoples of the Great Plains and Canadian Prairies. It's a First Nations or Native American organization, group of governments that have combined American Thanksgiving with their own traditions and formed a holiday called, I'm going to butcher this word, but I'm going to try it anyways, called Wopila. So some Native groups seem to be okay with the idea of Thanksgiving, but many groups aren't, calling for Americans to use Thanksgiving as a reminder of whitewashed history and Native genocide, or to just stop celebrating it altogether. Often there are Thanksgiving Day protests that are used as an opportunity to call for social justice for minority groups, especially Native Americans and migrant workers, but for other racial minorities as well. So Thanksgiving doesn't come without its share of controversy, but there is still something to be said for a holiday that forces Americans that traditionally are so fast-paced and overwhelmed and, well, not thankful, that we actually set a whole day aside and sit down and say all these things that we're thankful for, things that we normally overlook. There has to be some value to that, right? Well, as Christians, I think there's two big realities that we should approach with Thanksgiving. Even though it's not like a biblical holiday, there's still some value there for us. It has to do with our blessings and other people's lack of blessings. Let's deal with the first one, first. Our blessings should be responded to with thankfulness. We sit down at Thanksgiving every year, and like I said, we list out some vague things that we don't act grateful for most of the year, but there's some value to the fact that we sit down and say that we're thankful for our houses and our families and our food and all of those things, and our jobs and our educations and our friends and all these other great things that God has given us. It's firmly biblical to celebrate gifts with thankfulness. We're doing a whole series in church on it right now. 1 Timothy 4:4 says, "For everything God has created is good. We should not reject any of it, but receive it with thanks." And when Paul was writing that verse, he was probably specifically talking about food, especially food that was sacrificed to idols, and how Christians could eat it, but they shouldn't do it if it causes someone else to have a crisis of conscience. Paul's point being, well, God made that food. The idol isn't real, and you should be able to receive it with thankfulness. Now let's take that same principle and expand it outwards. There's nothing wrong with having a house. You should receive it with thankfulness. There's nothing wrong with having a degree or having a good job. You should receive it with thankfulness. It is firmly biblical to say, God has given me something good. I want to say I'm thankful for it. We should. And the Psalms actually does it a lot. So maybe Thanksgiving is a good thing. It's an opportunity for us to sit down individually or as a family and read scripture about thankfulness or about God's provision, to take a moment of silence before the meal to thank Jesus for everything that he has done for us. Some people do those what you're thankful for tablecloths, where you get this big white tablecloth and some Sharpies, and everyone in the family writes like the date, their name, and one thing they're thankful for. And you break out the same tablecloth year after year after year, and what you end up with after a decade or so is a tablecloth covered in things that you're thankful for. And you can even go back and read them later. It's really funny to make a 16-year-old read what they were thankful for when they were 6. It's kind of a fun family tradition, but it makes an important point that, well, you should express thankfulness to God for all the wonderful things that you have. There's some value in that. So Thanksgiving can't be a bad thing, right? At the same time, Thanksgiving and actually the holidays in general make us very aware of other people's lack of physical blessing. And that should be responded to with action. So where we are blessed, we should respond with thankfulness, but where others have a need, we need to respond with action. James 2:15 through 16 says, "Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. If one of you tells him, 'Go in peace, stay warm, and be well fed,' but doesn't provide for his physical needs, what good is that? paraphrase, translation, Jason's paraphrase of this is, if somebody has a need, you as a Christian, if you are at all capable, has to answer the need. And the holidays are a good time to do that. I mean, even without the political and social debates about genocide and racism in American history, when Thanksgiving actually began and if we should even celebrate it at all, setting all those arguments aside for a minute, think very simply about your experience with holidays. Around Thanksgiving and Christmas time, don't you see a ton of people stop and give money to a Salvation Army Santa that would never give to charity otherwise? Even people who aren't exceedingly religious or exceedingly generous or both realize around the holidays there are people that have much less than they do, and they are very willing to give, very willing to act generously, even if that's not normally in their character. There's something to be said for a holiday, for a time of the year, that makes us not only thankful for what we have, but willing to share with others. And if that's something that's already in our culture, well, maybe we as Christians should take advantage of it, especially if you're a parent. And you have an opportunity here to establish a tradition of selfless service, of charity or volunteerism in your kids around the holidays. What if you started a tradition where you did a household food drive every Thanksgiving to donate to the food pantry? What if you started a tradition of baking cookies and handing them out? Maybe this year in the middle of COVID wouldn't be the greatest year to do that, but maybe you start that next year. You bake cookies and just hand them out around the neighborhood as, yay, we're so happy to know you, neighbor sort of thing. I don't know. Maybe you can come up with a lot better idea. In fact, I'm willing to bet most of you can come up with a better idea than that. But the point is, if we have a period of the year where people are already thankful and thinking about the needs of others, why not take advantage of that? Because thankfulness and caring for the needs of others are both wonderful Christian ethics. So is Thanksgiving a Christian holiday? Well, kind of, but not really, but also kind of. So yeah, sure, maybe. But ultimately, it doesn't really matter. What does matter is that the holidays give us a wonderful opportunity to express thankfulness to God for all the good things He's given us, and an opportunity to think about the needs of others that maybe we wouldn't slow down and consider otherwise. The holidays are an amazing time of year. God has been good to us, and many others are struggling. Those are realities that are clear to us in this time of the year. So we can use the spirit of the holiday season to address both those things with our family traditions and grow as Christians in the process. Hopefully my musings and a little bit of history on the holiday of Thanksgiving have been helpful to you. If so, then please subscribe. Please check us out online. We have our sermons and other devos like this posted up on our YouTube and Facebook all the time. So hopefully there's something there that can help you. Like I said, subscribe, share this video, do that sort of stuff. And if you have the time on Thursday nights, we have a group of people that meet to have conversations based around these videos. So please join them if you're in that group. Thanks for being there. We appreciate you. Anyways, I'll see you guys either Sunday or next Wednesday. I hope you have a good one. Bye.